There are entire chapters of human history that have been deliberately erased from official records, relegated to the realm of myths and legends. While conventional archaeology traces our evolutionary line in a linear and predictable way, ancient texts from diverse cultures, from Sumerian tablets to pre-Columbian manuscripts, whisper about advanced civilizations that preceded what we consider to be the beginning of humanity. These accounts, found in traditions separated by oceans and millennia, converge on a disturbing narrative: the existence of a highly developed humanoid race that inhabited the Earth before the Great Flood. The traces of this lost civilization are hidden in plain sight, in megalithic structures impossible to replicate with modern technology, in maps showing submerged continents, and in sacred texts that mention sons of God who walked among men. As new archaeological discoveries constantly challenge our understanding of the past, a disturbing question emerges from the shadows. Who were these advanced beings that conventional history insists on making us forget, and why has their legacy been so meticulously erased? The canons of modern history are like a carefully woven tapestry, but when we look closely, we can perceive loose threads that reveal an older and more disturbing narrative. In archaeological sites across 5 continents, anomalous evidence defies the chronology established by conventional science. Structures such as the Baalbek platform in Lebanon contain stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, transported and positioned with a precision that modern engineers admit is practically impossible to replicate, even with our current technology. Which begs the question: what knowledge did our ancestors possess that has been lost in the sands of time? The Sumerian texts, considered to be humanity's most ancient writings, tell surprisingly detailed stories about the Anunnaki, beings described as having descended from heaven. These cuneiform texts, preserved on clay tablets over 5,000 years ago, describe with disturbing accuracy a race of advanced beings who came to Earth and created humans through genetic manipulation. The Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh are not merely fanciful stories. They are preserved memories of a time when, according to these traditions, gods and men walked side by side on the same plane of existence. The Bible, when analyzed outside the filter of traditional religious interpretation, reveals enigmatic passages that theologians prefer not to address directly. The book of Genesis 6 verse 4 clearly states, "In those days there were giants on the earth, and also afterward, when the sons of God came together with the daughters of men, and begot children of them." Who were these sons of God? Who were these sons of God? And why was their genetic legacy so significant as to be mentioned in the sacred scriptures? These passages, so often glossed over by conventional interpretations, open doors to a revolutionary understanding of our true ancestry. The oral traditions of indigenous peoples around the world share a recurring theme: the existence of a previous golden age, when superior beings inhabited the earth. The Hopi speak of the Kachinas. The Dogon of West Africa have preserved unexplained astronomical knowledge about the star system of Sirius, and the ancient Maya refer to visitors from the stars who brought knowledge and civilization. It's remarkable how cultures that never had contact with each other developed such similar myths about high beings who built the first civilizations. Coincidence? Or fragments of a collective memory that has resisted systematic erasure? The maps of Piri Reis and other ancient cartographers show with disturbing precision continents that supposedly had not yet been discovered, including details of ice-free Antarctica, a condition that, according to modern science, did not exist at least 12,000 years ago. How could these ancient cartographers have had access to such information? The most provocative answer suggests that these maps were copied from much older originals, coming from a civilization that possessed advanced mapping technology and existed before the Great Flood that reconfigured the Earth's geography. Geological records confirm that approximately between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, our planet went through a devastating climate catastrophe. Modern scientific evidence, including iridium deposits and platinum anomalies found in stratigraphic layers from this period, suggests a cosmic event, possibly the impact of a comet, which triggered global flooding, the abrupt melting of polar ice caps, and the extinction of numerous species. This period coincides precisely with the end of the last ice age and the mysterious disappearance of megafauna on all continents. Could this be the flood mentioned in more than 200 different cultural traditions around the world? When we explore submerged ruins like those found near Yonaguni in Japan, or the underwater structures near Cuba that lie more than 700 meters deep, we face anomalies that conventional archaeology prefers to ignore. These structures show complex architectural patterns and lie at depths that could only have been submerged tens of thousands of years ago, long before the supposed beginning of human civilization. Why does academia refuse to seriously investigate these discoveries? What are they afraid of finding in the depths that could destabilize our entire understanding of human history? Human DNA, that complex code we carry in every cell, contains segments that geneticists call junk DNA, apparently functionless portions that make up the bulk of our genome. Recent studies in advanced genetics are beginning to discover that this DNA is not junk, but a vast repository of information whose function we still don't fully understand. Even more intriguing is the discovery that the human genome contains endogenous viral sequences and unexplained evolutionary leaps. How can we explain the fact that our DNA contains more than 145 genes that don't seem to have evolutionary precursors in primates? Where did these unique genetic sequences come from that separated us so dramatically from our supposed evolutionary ancestors? Ancient Hindu traditions speak of yugas, cosmic cycles of time where advanced civilizations appear and disappear in an eternal return. Texts such as the Mahabharata describe with disturbing precision weapons that resemble nuclear technology, flying vehicles called vimanas, and cities that glowed with a light of their own. For a long time, Western historians dismissed these descriptions as mere fantasy, but modern archaeological discoveries, such as the traces of unexplained vitrification in ancient Indian cities and the anomalous levels of radiation at Mohenjo-Daro, are beginning to suggest that these texts may contain preserved memories of advanced technologies that existed and were lost millennia ago. When we put all these pieces together, archaeological anomalies, ancient texts, oral traditions, geological and genetic evidence, a disturbing picture begins to emerge. The concrete possibility that one or more highly advanced civilizations existed before ours and were almost completely eradicated by a global catastrophe. The survivors of this cataclysm, drastically reduced in number and deprived of their technological infrastructure, would have been forced to start again almost from scratch, preserving only fragments of their knowledge through oral traditions which, over time, became the myths and legends we know today. What if what we call history is just the most recent short chapter in a much older and grander saga of humanity? A saga that someone, for some reason, doesn't want us to remember? Ancient records converge on a fascinating point when describing these pre-Diluvian beings. They were physically different from us. Sumerian, Egyptian, and Vedic texts consistently mention beings of towering stature, often described as being between 3 and 4 times the height of an ordinary man. Archaeological discoveries around the world have revealed animalistic skeletal remains that defy conventional categorization, elongated skulls found in Peru with a brain volume 40% larger than the modern human, giant femurs unearthed in the Caucasus and Romania that suggest impossible heights according to the parameters of known human biology. When science finds something that doesn't fit into its paradigm, what is the most common response? Classify it as a fraud, an anomaly, or simply file it away from the public eye. The physiology of these beings, according to many ancient sources, had distinctive characteristics beyond mere stature. Egyptian texts describe the Neteru, mistakenly translated as gods, as possessing a different blood, referred to as ichor in various Mediterranean traditions. Modern DNA analysis carried out in 2019 on Egyptian mummies from the royal lineage found anomalous genetic sequences that are still awaiting proper classification. More intriguing is the fact that the elongated skull from Paracas, Peru, has revealed genetic sequences that do not correspond to any known human lineage, with mutations in mitochondrial DNA that would have required hundreds of thousands of years to develop naturally. What if these were not anomalies, but genuine traces of a previous humanity? The sensory capacities of these pre-Diluvian beings are described in ancient texts as vastly superior to ours. Tibetan manuscripts preserved in isolated monasteries speak of ancestors who could see beyond the material veil and hear the vibrations of the stars. For centuries, such descriptions have been considered metaphorical, but recent neuroscientific discoveries about altered states of consciousness and latent parapsychic abilities in the human brain are beginning to suggest another possibility. What if our remote ancestors possessed neurological structures that allowed extrasensory perceptions as a natural part of their experience? The pineal gland, that small pine cone-shaped organ in the center of our brain that Descartes called the seat of the soul, appears disproportionately larger in certain specimens of ancient skulls. What could this mean for their perceptual abilities? The longevity of these beings is another aspect consistently mentioned in traditions around the world. The Bible attributes lifespans of hundreds of years to the antediluvian patriarchs. Methuselah is said to have lived 969 years. Sumerian king lists record rulers with reigns of thousands of years. For a long time, Historians dismissed this information as symbolic exaggerations, but new research into cellular aging, telomeres, and the potential for epigenetic regeneration sheds a different light on these narratives. Scientists at Harvard University managed to reverse aging in laboratory mice through genetic manipulation in 2020. What seemed impossible yesterday becomes plausible today. Wouldn't it be conceivable that a technologically advanced civilization tens of thousands of years ago had mastered aspects of biology that we are only beginning to understand? The cognitive capacity of these beings, according to ancient texts, far transcended our current understanding of human intelligence. The Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus, describe a form of cognition that united intuition and intellect without the division we experience today. Ancient mystical schools in Greece, Egypt, and India preserved techniques for expanding consciousness that they claimed were recovered fragments of a much larger system of knowledge. Modern studies into non-ordinary states of consciousness, such as those carried out at the Monroe Institute and at universities researching mediumistic and transcendental experiences, are beginning to map altered states that correspond remarkably closely to ancient descriptions. What if our contemporary consciousness was only a limited fraction of the cognitive potential that these earlier beings naturally possessed? The relationship between these antediluvians and the Earth's electromagnetic field is particularly fascinating. Druidic traditions and Celtic records mention their divine ancestors' ability to navigate the currents of the Earth and move large stones through sound. For decades, such reports were ridiculed, until modern acoustic experiments demonstrated the levitation of heavy objects through precisely calibrated sound waves. John Burke's studies on the electromagnetic properties of megalithic sites revealed that many of these monuments are strategically positioned on geomagnetic anomalies and function as natural amplifiers of specific frequencies. Is it not conceivable that the builders of these structures understood and manipulated energy fields in ways that we have lost the ability to understand? The records of the technological capabilities of these beings are perhaps the most disturbing and systematically suppressed. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a Sanskrit text from the 11th century, contains detailed descriptions of flying machines called vimanas, including instructions for their construction and the metals needed to withstand the extreme temperatures of flight. The Library of Alexandria, before its destruction, supposedly housed texts from a pre-Diluvian era with advanced technological knowledge. What remains today are only fragments preserved in esoteric traditions. The Byzantine historian Agathias mentions antediluvian manuscripts saved in underground temples in Central Asia, containing knowledge too dangerous to be revealed to mankind. How many ancient libraries have been deliberately burned throughout history? And what were these acts of systematic destruction trying to hide? The social structure and system of government of these antediluvian civilizations, according to the fragments that have survived, was radically different from anything we know in recorded history. Esoteric texts speak of societies without rigid hierarchies, organized around principles of vibrational resonance and energetic affinity, rather than coercive power. The priestly elites of cultures such as the Egyptian and Mayan preserved concepts such as Ma'at, the cosmic order, and Hunab-Ku, the one consciousness, which were not just abstract philosophical principles, but the practical foundations of social organizations based on natural and cosmic laws. The Druidic circles of pre-Christian Europe maintained traditions of consensual government based on natural cycles that they claimed derived from a much older and more sophisticated system. Does our inability to conceive of such social systems reflect not their impossibility, but the limitations of our own fragmented consciousness? The planetary and cosmic connection of these beings is another aspect consistently mentioned in ancient texts. Vedic traditions describe a time when communication between worlds was common, with rainbow bridges connecting different realms of existence. Hopi texts speak of interdimensional portals administered by the Kachinas. The ancient Celts preserved knowledge about thin places, places where the veil between dimensions becomes permeable. Modern science, through quantum physics and theories such as parallel universes, is beginning to build models that could explain such phenomena in scientific terms. The work of physicist Jack Sarfati on retrocausality and communication between non-localized consciousnesses offers a theoretical framework for what was previously dismissed as superstition. What if these antediluvian beings were not only technologically advanced, but qualitatively different in their vibrational nature and ability to interact with multiple dimensions of reality? The most intriguing and disturbing aspect about these pre-Diluvian beings is the reason for their apparent disappearance. Virtually all the world's traditions converge on the narrative of a great catastrophe, usually described as a flood, but often accompanied by other cataclysms such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and shifts in the Earth's axis. What few texts openly explore, but many esoteric traditions have preserved, is the possibility that this destruction was not completely natural, but partly caused by advanced technological warfare. Vedic texts describe weapons such as the Brahmastra capable of destroying entire civilizations. The Mayan Popol Vuh mentions storms of fire sent to purify the earth. Fragments of Sumerian texts speak of weapons from heaven used in conflicts between gods. Physical evidence, from layers of unexplained vitrification in ancient ruins to radioactive anomalies at certain sites, is beginning to suggest a disturbing possibility: that the end of the antediluvian era may have involved a destructive technology whose ethical use failed drastically. Could this be the true origin of the myths about the fall and divine transgression preserved in so many spiritual traditions? The reckless use of technologies so advanced that they seemed magical, leading to the near extinction of an entire species? The megalithic structures scattered around the world represent an indecipherable enigma for conventional archaeology. In Sacsayhuaman, Peru, stone blocks weighing up to 200 tons have been cut with millimeter precision and fitted together without mortar, so perfectly that not even a knife blade can be inserted between them. The actual quarry from which these blocks were extracted is more than 35 kilometers away, separated by mountains and deep valleys. Modern engineering experts openly admit, we don't have the technology to replicate such feats with the same precision today. When confronted with these anomalies, conventional archaeologists offer explanations that border on the absurd: extraordinary dedication, lost sand polishing techniques, and thousands of workers over decades. But do these superficial explanations really respond to the mathematical precision found in these structures, which often show errors of less than 0.5 millimeters on hard stone surfaces such as granite and diorite? The cutting technology employed in ancient monuments reveals capabilities that defy our understanding. In Aswan, Egypt, there is an unfinished obelisk still connected to the quarry, weighing approximately 1,200 tons. The cut marks visible on the stone show perfectly straight and deep grooves, consistent throughout, something impossible to achieve with copper or bronze tools, the only metals the Egyptians supposedly had at the time. Modern experiments have shown that not even iron tools can replicate such cuts in granite without severe wear. At Abu Rosh, granite blocks were discovered with circular saw marks with diameters estimated at more than 2 meters, clear evidence of high-precision rotary cutting technology. Egyptian hieroglyphics show images of devices that look like electric lamps and mechanisms that suggest advanced technology. If these civilizations were truly primitive, how can we explain this evidence of technological capability that we can barely reproduce today? The astronomical knowledge embedded in ancient structures completely transcends what would be expected of primitive civilizations. The Angkor Wat complex in Cambodia precisely replicates the Draco constellation as it appeared 10,500 years ago, not during the time of its supposed construction. The pyramids of Giza mathematically mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt exactly as they appeared in the sky of 10,450 BC, a period which, according to conventional archaeology, predates the development of human civilization by thousands of years. The Göbekli Tepe complex in Turkey, officially dated at 12,000 years old, already revolutionizing the accepted chronology, contains pillars that record a catastrophic astronomical event, the impact of cometary fragments, which recent scientific research confirms occurred around that time. How could supposedly primitive peoples, without advanced optical instruments, record celestial alignments in stone with arcsecond precision? And even more intriguing, why do so many ancient structures point specifically to astronomical events from around 12,000 years ago, precisely the period that coincides with the end of the last ice age and the supposed global flood? Ancient artifacts often reveal technological anomalies that conventional history cannot explain. The Baghdad Battery, dated to around 2,000 years ago, demonstrates a working knowledge of electrochemistry. Metallurgical analysis of artifacts found in India reveals steel alloys with carbon nanostructures that were only replicated by modern metallurgists in the 20th century. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck and dating back to the 1st century BC, contains precision differential gears and an analog computer system capable of predicting eclipses and planetary positions with astonishing accuracy. Where did this knowledge come from? In 1938, Chinese archaeologists discovered stone discs in the Bayan Karaula Mountains containing tiny metal circuits incredibly similar to modern computer chips, artifacts that were quickly classified and removed from public display. Why are discoveries that challenge the official narrative systematically relegated to the basements of museums, away from public scrutiny. Evidence of advanced electrical and energy knowledge appears in multiple ancient records. The Vedic texts describe in detail Agni Vidyut, a force described in a remarkably similar way to electricity, including its ability to be stored in special containers. In ancient Egypt, reliefs in the Temple of Hathor in Dendera show what appear to be functional electric lamps, complete with insulators and cables. Chemical analyses of the soot on the ceilings of certain Egyptian underground chambers do not contain residues of smoke from torches or oil lamps, as would be expected if these were the lighting sources used. Instead, the deposition patterns are consistent with electric lighting. Modern experiments based on Dendera's designs have produced functional arc lamps. If this knowledge was available to the ancients, what other energy principles could they have mastered that we still miss? The mathematical knowledge embedded in ancient structures often surpasses modern understanding. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the constant pi to the 6th decimal place, the golden ratio, the exact circumference of the Earth, and the speed of light in a set of mathematical relationships that could not be accidental. The Temple of Karnak incorporates advanced acoustic principles that create inexplicable sound phenomena, including chambers that amplify specific frequencies while canceling out others. The work of engineer Christopher Dunn has shown that certain Egyptian artifacts, such as alabaster and granite vases, exhibit precision impossible to achieve without high-speed mechanical lathes controlled with mathematical exactitude. The perfect symmetry, the consistency of internal and external curvatures, and the uniform finish defy any explanation based on hand tools. How can we explain the fact that some parts exhibit smaller error tolerances than those required by the modern aerospace industry, produced supposedly thousands of years ago? Ancient mining systems reveal inexplicable technological capabilities. In 1982, miners in South Africa discovered prehistoric tunnels more than 30 meters deep containing perfectly balanced metal spheres with parallel grooves at their equator objects that would become known as the Klerksdorp spheres. Controversial dating has suggested ages of up to 2.8 billion years. On the Isle of Pines, near Cuba, complex underwater tunnel systems feature precise cuts and right angles impossible to produce without advanced machinery. In 1965, on Mount Huascarán in Peru, perfectly cylindrical tunnels were discovered, as if drilled by large machines, crossing the mountain for kilometers. Analysis of the walls revealed vitrification, suggesting the use of high-temperature technology. Conventional archaeologists rarely investigate these discoveries, preferring to classify them as natural phenomena without any detailed study. What reasons could justify such systematic scientific neglect? The architectural similarities between monuments separated by oceans and millennia suggest a global cultural matrix that preceded known civilizations. Pyramids with identical mathematical proportions appear in Egypt, Mexico, China, and Bosnia, often incorporating the same acoustic and electromagnetic principles. Identical symbols, such as the flower of life and the logarithmic spiral based on the golden ratio, appear carved in stone in locations thousands of kilometers apart, without any known contact between the cultures. Linguist Harold Harmon has identified a prehistoric writing system that appears on artifacts from Europe, Asia, and America, dating back approximately 10,000 years. How can we explain these global consistencies without acknowledging the existence of a previous global civilization that passed on this knowledge? Or should we believe the unlikely theory that multiple isolated cultures independently developed the same complex symbolic, mathematical, and architectural systems? Geological evidence of simultaneous catastrophic destruction appears in archaeological sites around the world, precisely in the time window of 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. Geologist Robert Schoch's work on the Sphinx in Egypt has shown, through water erosion analysis, that the monument must have been carved at least 10,000 years ago, when the Egyptian climate was still rainy. Evidence of sudden and catastrophic floods appears in contemporary geological strata on all continents. Analysis of Greenland ice cores reveals an abrupt warming event of approximately 8 degrees Celsius in less than a decade 11,700 years ago, coinciding exactly with the end of the Younger Dryas period and the beginning of the Holocene. The work of geologist James Kennett identified a layer of microdiamonds, glassy carbon, and other indicators of cosmic impact precisely in this same stratigraphic layer. Are these scientific discoveries finally corroborating the ancient reports of a global cataclysm that ended a previous era? The most disturbing aspect of this investigation is not the physical evidence itself, but the systematic pattern of suppression of these findings by mainstream academia. Archaeologists like Klaus Schmidt, who excavated Göbekli Tepe, report institutional pressure not to question the established chronology. Egyptologist John Anthony West was ostracized by the academic community for decades after presenting scientific evidence for the antiquity of the Sphinx. In 1909, explorer G.E. Kincaid reported discovering a vast underground city with Egyptian mummies and artifacts in the Grand Canyon, after which the Smithsonian Institution allegedly confiscated all the finds and sealed off the area. Why do scientific institutions, theoretically dedicated to discovering the truth, show such resistance to seriously investigating archaeological anomalies? What kind of established paradigm is being protected, and at what cost to our true understanding of human origins? When we confront the totality of this evidence, impossible structures, advanced knowledge, inexplicable global similarities, and evidence of abrupt catastrophes, a disturbing conclusion emerges. The human history we have been taught is, at best, incomplete, and at worst, deliberately falsified. Modern genetics offers a fascinating window into our most remote past, revealing secrets that ancient texts seem to have encoded in mythological language. In 2010, genomic analysis identified that modern human DNA contains unexplained sequences that are not found in primates and cannot be traced through conventional Darwinian evolution. Geneticist Francis Crick, discoverer of the structure of DNA and Nobel Prize winner, even proposed the hypothesis of directed panspermia, suggesting that life on Earth could have been deliberately seeded by an advanced civilization. Is it mere coincidence that the ancient Sumerian texts describe just that? The Anunnaki genetically manipulating proto-humans to create Homo sapiens as we know it today? The so-called Y-chromosomal Adam and mitochondrial Eve represent the most recent common genetic ancestors of all modern humans. Studies published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2013 date these ancestors to approximately 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, a surprisingly narrow time window that suggests a founding event in the human species. This period coincides with a sudden and as yet unexplained evolutionary leap in human brain complexity. Traditional evolutionary theory predicts gradual changes over millions of years, not abrupt leaps in complexity over relatively short periods. How can we explain this sudden acceleration without considering the possibility of deliberate genetic intervention? When scientists such as Bruce Land from the University of Chicago identified specific genes related to brain development that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere in this period, the scientific community was left in an explanatory impasse that remains to this day. The distribution of human blood groups presents anomalies that defy conventional explanations. The Rh-negative blood type, present in approximately 15% of the world's population, lacks the rhesus protein found not only in Rh-positive people, but also in all primates. Rh-negative individuals have distinct physiological characteristics, including lower body temperature, higher blood pressure, and, curiously, greater sensitivity to certain electromagnetic stimuli. Rh-negative women pregnant with Rh-positive fetuses develop antibodies against the fetus itself, a trait that would be evolutionarily counterproductive and should have been eliminated by natural selection. Instead, this trait persists significantly in certain populations, especially among the Basques of northern Spain, where the incidence is as high as 30%. How can we explain the origin and persistence of this genetically disadvantageous trait? Curiously, Basque mythology speaks of a non-terrestrial origin for its people. Could this be another piece in the puzzle of human origins? The causes of the bifurcation between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens represent another genetic enigma. For decades, it was believed that we were distinct species that eventually interbred. However, findings published in Nature in 2018 revealed that the split was much more recent and abrupt than previously thought. Analysis of ancient DNA suggests that, rather than a gradual divergence, there was a sudden split approximately 600,000 years ago, as if one group had been deliberately isolated or genetically modified. Even more intriguing is the fact that modern humans have specific Neanderthal genes related to cognition and the immune system, but almost none related to physical characteristics, a highly non-random inheritance pattern that suggests artificial rather than natural selection. Geneticists Sharon Molam and Matthew LaPlante propose in recent research that these inheritance patterns seem almost designed to maximize certain specific cognitive abilities. The mitochondrion, this cellular energy factory that has its own DNA independent of the nucleus, represents another evolutionary enigma. Mitochondrial DNA is transmitted exclusively by the maternal lineage and contains genes that diverge significantly from the rest of the human genome. Traditional endosymbiotic theory suggests that mitochondria were originally separate organisms that were incorporated into cells in a symbiotic process. However, recent genetic analyses show that human mitochondria contain unique sequences that are not found in other primates and that appeared relatively suddenly in evolutionary history. Geneticists at Kyoto University in Japan have identified that these specific human mitochondrial sequences are responsible for our capacity for exceptional brain development and much more efficient use of oxygen, characteristics that are essential for the development of advanced consciousness. How could such highly specific genetic optimizations arise simultaneously without some form of directed selection? Certain regulatory sequences in human DNA, known as transposable elements or jumping genes, have the ability to move and replicate within the genome. These elements make up approximately 45% of our genetic material and were long considered junk DNA. However, research published in the journal Cell in 2022 showed that these sequences are not random, but highly structured, as if they were codes within codes. Even more surprisingly, when analyzed using pattern recognition algorithms, these sequences reveal complex mathematical structures that resemble artificial programming languages. How can we explain the fact that our DNA contains organizational patterns that have only recently become recognizable through advanced computer technology? Could it be that these sequences function as a kind of source code that could be accessed and modified by advanced genetic engineering technologies, precisely as described in Sumerian texts about the creation of the first Adamu? The human capacity for complex symbolic language represents another unexplained evolutionary leap. The FOXP2 gene, known as the language gene, underwent specific mutations unique to modern humans that occurred approximately 100,000 years ago, coinciding with the sudden emergence of symbolic art, complex funerary rituals, and other manifestations of abstract thought. These genetic modifications are so specific and functionally optimized that they raise questions about their origin. According to studies by Oxford University, the probability of such mutations occurring randomly and producing exactly these linguistic capacities is astronomically small. Interestingly, ancient texts from various cultures describe the emergence of language as a gift from the gods. In Egypt attributed to Thoth, in Sumer to Enki, in Mesoamerica to Quetzalcoatl. Are these narratives just metaphors or allegorical descriptions of a real genetic intervention? Human cognitive abilities for abstract mathematics, theoretical physics, and philosophical contemplation vastly exceed what is necessary for evolutionary survival. Neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran notes that our ability to understand quantum mechanics or develop non-Euclidean geometry confers no obvious evolutionary advantage and represents a conundrum for natural selection. Recent comparative genomic studies have identified uniquely human genetic regulatory cascades that control prenatal brain development in a highly sophisticated manner, far beyond what would be expected from simple beneficial random mutations. Neuroscientists Michael Gazzaniga and Antonio Damasio propose that the human cognitive leap is so pronounced that it suggests some form of evolutionary engineering, whether natural or artificial. The ancient Vedic texts speak precisely of gods who breathed divine breath into humans, granting them mental capacities that distinguish them from animals. Are we today scientifically rediscovering what ancient cultures preserved in mythological language? Analyses of ancient DNA are revealing ghost genetic lineages that don't fit into our current understanding of human evolution. In 2019, geneticists identified sequences in the DNA of modern African populations that appear to derive from an unknown hominid species that split from the common evolutionary trunk more than 1 million years ago. Similarly, analyses of the genome of Australian Aborigines carried out by the University of Copenhagen have revealed genetic sequences from a completely unknown hominid species that does not correspond to any fossils ever found. These findings raise disturbing questions. How many hominid species really existed? And more importantly, what happened to them? The idea of multiple pre-Diluvian races, some more advanced than others, is beginning to find unexpected scientific validation in the latest genomic discoveries. The global distribution patterns of certain human haplogroups defy conventional migration chronology. Studies published in 2020 in Nature identified that certain genetic markers appear in geographically isolated populations without any evidence of migration to explain their presence. For example, specific genetic markers appear simultaneously in Native American populations and in isolated tribes in eastern Siberia, with no presence in the intermediate populations, as if they had been implanted independently in separate locations. Geneticist Spencer Wells, from the Genographic Project, observes that certain patterns of human genetic distribution are more like a network or matrix than a linear evolutionary tree. This fragmentary distribution pattern would be consistent with a hypothesis that genetically modified human groups were strategically positioned in different regions of the planet after a global catastrophic event, precisely as described in ancient texts that recount the rebuilding of humanity after the flood. When we analyze the totality of the genetic evidence, unexplained evolutionary leaps, mathematically complex regulatory sequences, disproportionate cognitive capacities, and anomalous genetic distribution patterns, a picture emerges that begins to scientifically validate what ancient texts have allegorically described. That modern humanity may not simply be the result of gradual Darwinian evolution, but the product of deliberate genetic intervention. However, the most disturbing question remains: if this intervention really took place, what was its purpose? And more importantly, has the intervention been completed, or is it still ongoing, operating through epigenetic mechanisms that could activate latent capacities in response to specific environmental stimuli? Are we witnessing, in the rapid neurological and consciential transformations of contemporary humanity, the activation of a program established millennia ago, just waiting for the appropriate moment to manifest its full potential? The ancient numerological systems preserved in esoteric traditions contain surprisingly advanced mathematical principles. The Sumerian sexagesimal system, base 60, which we still use to measure time and angles, incorporates mathematical properties that facilitate complex astronomical calculations in a way that is impossible with our modern decimal system. This system allowed the Sumerians to calculate planetary cycles with exceptional precision without the need for advanced optical technology. Vedic mathematics contains formulas for calculating square and cube roots instantly, as well as algorithms that anticipated differential calculus by thousands of years. The most intriguing thing is that these systems were explicitly attributed to knowledge handed down by the gods in ancient times. Modern mathematician A.K. Dewdney notes that these ancient formulas seem optimized for computational efficiency in a way that would be impossible to develop by trial and error. How can we explain the fact that ancient cultures possessed mathematical systems that we have only recently been able to fully appreciate in their sophistication? Ancient medicine preserved in texts such as the Egyptian Ebers Papyrus, 1550 BC, and the Indian Sushruta Samhita, around 600 BC, contains anatomical and pharmacological knowledge that defies conventional historical explanations. The Indian text describes surgical techniques, including facial and cranial plastic surgery, which were only rediscovered by Western medicine in the 20th century. Chemical analysis of medicines described in the Ebers Papyrus revealed antibiotic combinations effective against specific infections, knowledge impossible without an understanding of microbiology. More surprisingly, Tibetan medical texts speak of blood circulation and the role of red blood cells in oxygen transportation millennia before William Harvey. Archaeological evidence of successful cranial trepanning, with patient survival proven by bone regeneration, on Peruvian mummies demonstrates exceptional surgical skill without modern equipment. Where would this advanced medical knowledge come from without the scientific infrastructure we consider necessary for such discoveries? The astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient texts and monuments often exceeds what could be observed with the naked eye. The Mayans calculated the length of the solar year as 365.2420 days, more precise than our current Gregorian calendar, 365.2425 days, and surprisingly close to the modern scientific value of 365.2422 days. Without telescopes, how did they achieve such precision? The Indian Surya Siddhanta, dating from around 1000 BC, gives Mercury's diameter as 3008 miles, remarkably close to the modern value of 3032 miles. The same text describes Saturn as surrounded by rings, a feature impossible to observe without advanced optical instruments. Astronomer Carl Sagan noted that some of this astronomical information is so precise that it suggests instrumental observations, and not just theoretical extrapolations. Sumerian descriptions of the solar system include Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, planets invisible to the naked eye. The traditional explanation of luck or coincidence becomes less and less plausible as more of these astronomical hits are documented in ancient texts. The ancient understanding of electromagnetism appears encoded in multiple antediluvian artifacts and texts. Linguist and researcher Alexander Thom has shown that European megalithic circles are positioned at points of anomalous geomagnetic intensity and often incorporate materials with piezoelectric properties, which generate electricity under pressure. Modern measurements have confirmed that structures such as Stonehenge and Karnak, France, naturally amplify specific electromagnetic frequencies. Egyptian temples, particularly at Karnak and Abu Simbel, contain chambers lined with alternating conductive and insulating materials, creating structures similar to modern capacitors. Medieval alchemical texts, allegedly derived from older Egyptian manuscripts, describe methods for capturing celestial fire, possibly atmospheric electricity, using specific configurations of metals and stones. Could these structures and texts be remnants of advanced energy knowledge that has largely been lost? Ancient acoustics demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of physical principles that we have only recently rediscovered. Acoustic chambers in structures like Chavan de Huantar in Peru, built around 1500 BC, create specific sound effects that amplify certain frequencies while canceling out others, principles identical to those used in modern noise cancellation systems. The work of acoustic engineer David Lubman has shown that the Pyramid of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza produces, when you clap near its base, an echo that exactly reproduces the song of the sacred Quetzal bird, an effect that requires an advanced understanding of sound reflection and harmonics. Acoustic analyses of the Great Zimbabwe Chambers, conducted by Princeton University, have revealed amplification properties that allow whispered communication between specific points dozens of meters apart. How could supposedly primitive cultures, without acoustic measuring equipment, achieve such precise sound effects that challenge even modern engineers in their sophistication? Ancient metallurgical techniques often demonstrate knowledge that exceeds the technological capabilities of their time. Iron pillars such as the one in Delhi, India, built around 400 AD, remain practically rust-free after 1,600 years in an external environment, a property of corrosion resistance that modern metallurgists have only recently managed to replicate. Spectroscopic analysis of pre-Hispanic Colombian gold alloys has revealed nanostructures that create optical effects impossible to produce without advanced understanding of colloidal chemistry. Damascus steel swords, produced as far back as the 18th century, contain carbon nanotubes and nanowire structures that confer exceptional mechanical properties, microstructures that have only been identified with modern electron microscopy. Most disturbingly, many of these advanced metallurgical techniques have been lost, and ancient texts often mention that they were derived from even older knowledge, preserved from a previous era. This suggests that we are observing not the progressive evolution of techniques, but the degraded fragments of much more advanced knowledge. Ancient writing systems often incorporate multiple layers of meaning that we have only recently begun to understand. Egyptian hieroglyphs function simultaneously as phonetic, ideographic, and mathematical symbols, with each symbol operating on multiple levels of meaning. Modern computer analysis has revealed that certain hieroglyphic texts, when interpreted mathematically, contain equations that describe principles of quantum mechanics and wave physics. Sanskrit, considered by linguists to be the most mathematically precise of the ancient languages, has a grammatical structure analogous to modern programming languages, with each syllable precisely modifying its meaning according to strict rules. NASA computational linguist Rick Briggs has observed that Sanskrit would be the most suitable human language for communicating with artificial intelligence due to its rigorous logical structure. The implications are disturbing. Who would have developed such multidimensional linguistic systems in ancient times, and for what purpose? Ancient cartography preserved in maps such as that of Piri Reis, 1513, contains geographically impossible information for its time. Modern analysis has shown that this map shows the coastline of Antarctica free of ice, a condition that, according to geological data, did not exist at least 10,000 years ago. The Turkish cartographer explicitly stated that he copied his map from much older sources. Similarly, the map by Orontius Phineas, 1531, shows rivers and mountains in Antarctica that are today covered by up to 3 kilometers of ice, geographical features only recently confirmed by ice-penetrating radar. Professor Charles Hapgood, whose work was endorsed by Einstein, demonstrated mathematically that these maps were created using an advanced spherical projection system, incorporating knowledge of the Earth's curvature and geodesic triangulation methods that only became available in the modern era. How can we explain the fact that ancient maps accurately show geographical features that have been inaccessible for millennia, using cartographic techniques that we have only recently mastered? The geological knowledge preserved in indigenous oral traditions often demonstrates surprising scientific accuracy. Australian Aboriginal tribes preserve oral histories that describe changes in the coastline that occurred approximately 10,000 years ago, when the sea level rose after the glacial melt, details confirmed by modern geological studies. Native Americans from Cascadia preserve traditions about great earthquakes and tsunamis that occurred 300 years ago, events that were only scientifically confirmed in the 1990s through the dating of tree rings and marine sediments. Geologist Patrick Nunn has documented more than 30 cases in which oral traditions of Pacific peoples accurately describe volcanic events and geological changes that occurred thousands of years before any written record. How can we explain such precise preservation of specific scientific knowledge over so many generations, without formal recording systems? Could it be that these traditions derive not from casual observations, but from deliberate systems of knowledge preservation developed by a previous civilization? When we look at the totality of this ancient knowledge, advanced mathematics, sophisticated medicine, precise astronomy, mastery of electromagnetism and acoustics, animalistic metallurgy, multidimensional linguistics, impossible cartography and precise geology, a disturbing picture emerges. What we consider modern discoveries may in many cases be rediscoveries of knowledge that already existed in the distant past. The traditional narrative of linear progress, where each generation advances on the knowledge of the previous one, is beginning to give way to a cyclical model of knowledge, where advanced civilizations emerge, flourish, and then collapse, leaving only fragments of their understanding for subsequent cultures. But the most provocative question remains: if an advanced global civilization existed before the flood, what caused its collapse? And more critically, are we today repeating the same patterns that led to its demise? Throughout documented history, we have observed a systematic pattern of destruction of ancient knowledge that defies any explanation based on chance or negligence. The Library of Alexandria, which contained an estimated 700,000 manuscripts, including texts allegedly dating back to pre-Diluvian times, was repeatedly attacked and finally destroyed. The burning of the Pergamon Library, the destruction of the Mayan codices by Diego de Landa, the looting of the Chinese Imperial Library. These events represent only the best-known examples of a global pattern of deliberate elimination of ancient knowledge. Historian Michael Cremo documents how, in the last 2 centuries alone, more than 200 archaeological discoveries that defy conventional historical chronology have been actively suppressed or lost in museum deposits. What motivation would explain such a consistent, multi-century effort to eliminate evidence of previous advanced civilizations? The preservation of antediluvian knowledge through secret societies represents a fascinating counter-narrative. Orders such as the Eleusinian Mysteries of ancient Greece, the Roman Mitra cult, and later the Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, and early Freemasons, claim to preserve fragments of technical and spiritual knowledge from an earlier Golden Age. Modern analyses of Hermetic and alchemical texts reveal that precise scientific knowledge about chemical, astronomical, and medicinal processes is often hidden beneath their symbolic and allegorical language. Scientific historian Franz Cumont demonstrated that Mithraic ritual diagrams encoded advanced astronomical knowledge, while researcher Betty J. Dobbs documented how nonsense alchemical texts often contain precise chemical formulas when decoded. The pattern is consistent: technical and scientific knowledge from previous eras being preserved not openly, but encoded in symbolic systems and passed on through secret initiation. How can we explain this multi-millennial tradition of deliberately concealing knowledge? Reports of underground libraries containing antediluvian knowledge appear in multiple independent cultural traditions. Tibetan lamas speak of the Agarthi manuscripts preserved in deep caves in the Himalayas. Egyptian esoteric texts mention the rooms of Amenti, where the records of the Atlantean civilization are said to be kept. Andean traditions describe hidden libraries containing golden quipus with pre-Incan technical knowledge. Curiously, modern expeditions occasionally report discoveries that corroborate these traditions, such as the metal library found in Ecuadorian caves by Juan Morich in 1965, documented, but later declared inaccessible by government authorities. Anthropologist David Childress has documented consistent accounts from 19th and 20th century Western explorers who claim to have briefly seen such storehouses of knowledge before being denied access by local custodians. Were these hidden libraries preserving potentially dangerous knowledge from ancient times, deliberately kept away from the general public? Myths about forbidden technologies appear consistently in various world traditions. The Promethean legend of fire stolen from the gods, the biblical myth of the Tower of Babel, the Vedic tales of Vimanas, flying machines, whose construction knowledge was deliberately hidden after destructive use, all share a common theme. Advanced technologies were taken away from humanity after reckless use. Technology historian James P. Hogan notes that these myths typically include a critical element: not only the loss of the technology itself, but also the suppression of the knowledge that such technology ever existed. This pattern of double erasure, eliminating both the technology and the memory of it, suggests a deliberate strategy of knowledge control. Hermetic texts explicitly speak of a pact between initiates from various cultures after the flood to codify and hide certain technological knowledge which, in unprepared hands, could lead to catastrophes similar to those that would have destroyed previous civilizations. Evidence of catastrophic technologies appears in multiple ancient records. Vedic texts describe weapons such as the Brahmastra capable of making the sun appear small and leaving areas uninhabitable for generations, descriptions remarkably similar to the effects of nuclear weapons. Excavations at Mohenjo-Daro have revealed skeletons with anomalous levels of radiation and vitrified stones that require extremely high temperatures to form. Nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, when asked if Alamogordo was the first nuclear explosion in history, replied, quoting the Bhagavad Gita, "Yes, in modern history." Geological analyses of certain glass formations in the Libyan desert and southern Iraq reveal isotopic compositions consistent with thermonuclear explosions thousands of years ago. Is the modern taboo against weapons of mass destruction rooted not only in contemporary ethical considerations, but in deep cultural memories of previous technological catastrophes? Global synchronization of deluge narratives suggests not only an actual catastrophic event, but possibly a coordinated decision about how this event would be remembered. More than 600 distinct cultures preserve accounts of a great flood, but the intriguing element is that many include identical details that seem allegorical. The ark landing on a mountain, the dove or bird sent to find land, seeds and knowledge being deliberately preserved. Anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss observed that these structural similarities suggest not only the preservation of memory of a real event, but possibly the deliberate dissemination of a controlled narrative. It is remarkable that practically all traditions mention that the flood was sent as divine punishment for a specific human transgression, often described as trying to match the gods or using forbidden knowledge. Could this be a primitive case of narrative control on a global scale? A coordinated effort to ensure that future generations associate advanced technologies with catastrophic destruction? The distinction between exoteric, public, and esoteric, restricted knowledge appears in practically all ancient traditions. From Greek mystical schools to Egyptian temples, from Tibetan monasteries to Incan orders, ancient civilizations consistently maintained dual systems of knowledge. One simplified for the masses and the other, much more technical and comprehensive, restricted to initiates who underwent long periods of ethical and psychological preparation. The scholar of comparative religions Huston Smith called this phenomenon deliberate stratification of knowledge and observed its global presence. The philosopher Karl Jaspers noted that the simultaneous emergence of these systems in the axial period, approximately 800 to 200 BC, suggests a possible coordination between apparently disconnected cultures. This deliberate structuring of access to knowledge would be consistent with a hypothesis that survivors of a technologically advanced civilization, witnesses to its self-destruction, globally implemented systems to restrict access to potentially dangerous knowledge to carefully prepared individuals. The emergence of modern scientific materialism, eliminating consciential and energetic dimensions of reality, represents a curious discontinuity in the history of human thought. Virtually all ancient traditions, from Chinese medicine to Vedic physics, from Egyptian alchemy to Mesoamerican cosmologies, recognized consciousness as a fundamental component of physical reality. Physician Larry Dossey observes that the exclusion of consciousness from the Western scientific paradigm represents a historical anomaly, not a natural evolution of thought. Philosophically, this exclusion occurred precisely during the European Enlightenment, in parallel with the emergence of institutions such as the Royal Society, which explicitly rejected investigations into occult phenomena or vital energies. Historians of science such as David Lindbergh document how this materialism did not emerge organically from scientific discoveries, but was imposed as a philosophical filter that predetermined which types of discoveries would be considered scientific. Could it be that this redefinition of science was, in part, a strategy to limit the rediscovery of potentially dangerous advanced consciential technologies? The persistence of hierarchical information control structures extends into modern times. Contemporary systems of government security classification, corporate intellectual property protection, and restricted academic access perpetuate the ancient model of knowledge stratification. Historian Michael Wood has documented how, in the 20th century alone, more than 5,000 patents were classified as secret by Western governments, many relating to unconventional energy technologies. Investigative journalists like Annie Jacobson have documented the existence of black research programs that operate completely outside of public scrutiny or democratic oversight. Significantly, many of these suppressed technologies involve precisely the fields that ancient traditions described as forbidden, manipulation of fundamental energy fields, genetic alteration, and technologies that affect consciousness. The historical pattern suggests not a recent conspiracy, but the continuation of a multi-millennial tradition of hierarchical control of access to specific types of technological knowledge. The implications of this apparent knowledge management system transcend simplistic conspiracy theories. If there is a multi-millennial effort to restrict certain technological knowledge, its origins may lie not in malevolence, but in a form of precautionary wisdom. Philosopher Nick Bostrom, founder of Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute, proposes the principle of astronomical vulnerability, the idea that certain technologies could genuinely threaten the survival of the human species if developed prematurely. The ancient Hermetic texts explicitly spoke of a pact between guardians of knowledge after the flood, pledging not to allow certain technologies to be rediscovered until humanity had developed the ethical maturity to use them responsibly. Seen in this light, the apparent erasure of antediluvian civilizations could represent not a conspiracy in the modern sense, but an act of extreme protection, a deliberate effort by technically advanced survivors to prevent future civilizations from repeating their catastrophic mistakes. The central question that emerges from this examination is not just whether technologically advanced civilizations existed before the flood, but a much more disturbing one. If such civilizations self-destructed through the reckless use of powerful technologies, are we repeating the same pattern today? The parallels are disturbing. Accelerated development of potentially catastrophic technologies such as nuclear weapons, genetic manipulation, and artificial intelligence, with no corresponding evolution in our collective ethical maturity. Ancient traditions insistently warn of historical cycles in which advanced civilizations rise and fall precisely because of this imbalance between technological power and wisdom. Hopi prophecy speaks of previous worlds destroyed when humans forgot the way of harmony. Vedic texts describe previous yugas ended by the same disconnect between power and wisdom. The biblical narrative of the flood explicitly links it to human corruption. If these are not just allegories, but cultural memories of real events, then the most important, forbidden knowledge we should recover would not be technological, but ethical, the understanding of how to avoid the fate of the civilizations that preceded us. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of deep knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.